Why was no one at the table looking at her when the question was asked? The room was full, steel chairs, low voices, the constant hum of machinery beneath the floor like the station itself was breathing. But when the man spoke, loud, sharp, deliberate, it felt as if the sound tunneled through the noise and landed only on her. "Who's your commander?" The words weren't curiosity. They were ownership, a demand wrapped in confidence. She didn't look up. Her attention stayed on the tablet in front of her, lines of data scrolling in quiet obedience. Numbers, patterns, things that made sense, things that didn't posture. A few of the men glanced at one another. Someone coughed. No one laughed. No one stepped in. The man waited. He was tall, broad, the kind of presence that expected gravity to adjust around it. His uniform was immaculate, his posture practiced. The trident on his chest caught the overhead light like it deserved to be admired. "Hey," he said again, louder now. "I asked you something." Still nothing. Inside her chest, something familiar tightened. Not fear, not anger, recognition. She had met this moment before in different rooms with different faces. The moment when someone decided she was an anomaly to be corrected. She finished the line she was reading, saved the file. Only then did she lift her eyes. Her gaze was steady, almost distant, as if she were observing him from slightly outside the room. "You don't need to know that," she said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't challenge. It didn't apologize. It simply existed. The room changed. The man smiled, slow and incredulous, like someone entertained by resistance he fully intended to break. He leaned forward, palms pressing into the table, crowding her space without touching her. "That's not how this works," he said. "I'm Commander Jax, SEAL Detachment Lead. As of 72 hours ago, I'm responsible for security here, which means everyone answers to me, including you." He waited for submission. She watched his hands, noted the tension in his fingers, the way dominance always announced itself through small tells. "The person who commands me," she said quietly, "is not someone you'll ever meet." A few men shifted uncomfortably. She returned her eyes to the screen. The dismissal was complete. For a moment, no one breathed. Jack straightened, jaw tight, humiliation flashing hot and fast behind his eyes. He took a half step forward. And then the alarm screamed. Red light flooded the room, a sound sharp enough to cut through bone. Screens flickered, data collapsed. The station's hum stuttered, then deepened into something more desperate. Chaos rushed in to fill the silence she'd left behind. Someone shouted, someone swore. "Report," Jax barked, instinct snapping into place. "Solar event," a technician yelled back. "Massive CME scale, satellites are gone, just dropped." Lights dimmed, then steadied as backup systems engaged. They were alone now. No sky, no command, no outside voice. Jax moved like a man who needed motion to think. Orders flew, boots pounded, but beneath it all something brittle began to crack. Because without communication, authority was just noise. She stood. Not fast, not slow. Purposeful. She walked past him without a word. And for the first time since he'd arrived, Commander Jax didn't notice someone walking away from him. What was hidden beneath, the station mattered more than what was breaking above it. The lower levels were quieter, older, built before comfort was a consideration. She moved through them without hesitation, turning down corridors that weren't marked on public schematics. Behind a rack of obsolete servers, she pressed her palm to bare steel. The panel opened. Inside, blue light breathed softly. This was where the real work lived. She sat alone, the door sealing behind her, and allowed herself one breath longer than necessary. Not relief. Resolve. She activated the system. Connection established. The past reached forward and answered. Upstairs, frustration curdled into something darker. Jack stared at dead screens, at technicians shaking their heads, at a reality he couldn't shout into submission. And then the voice came through the internal channel. Calm female, unmistakably hers. "Commander Jax," it said, "I have an open line to Strategic Command." The room froze. Jax felt something cold slide down his spine. "What did you say?" he demanded. "I suggest you come to my location," she replied. "The general is waiting." For the first time, someone wasn't asking him to take control. They were telling him where it already was. And he didn't understand how that was possible. But he followed. Because whatever she was, she had just become the most important thing on the station. Why did the countdown feel louder than the alarms? The moment Jack stepped into the hidden room, he knew the ground had shifted. The space was small, controlled, no excess, a single chair, a console alive with layered information, and on the main screen, impossibly clear, the face of a four-star general who did not wait for introductions. "Report," the general said. Jack snapped to attention, instinct overriding confusion. He spoke crisply. "Secure perimeter, communications lost, situation unstable." "I know," the general replied. "Dr. Thorne is the only operational node we have left in this hemisphere." Jax's eyes flicked to her back. "Doctor." Before he could process that, a new alert cut through the room. "Perimeter breach." Not loud, precise. She was already moving, fingers gliding across projections that rearranged reality faster than anyone else could read it. "They're not trying to get in," she said. "They're targeting the geothermal cooling lines." "Silence." "That would shut us down," the engineer breathed. "Life support." 12 hours, she finished. A timer appeared. 94 seconds. Jax felt it then. The helplessness. The moment every commander dreads but never admits is possible. He had men outside. Blind. Walking into a kill zone. "I need to move," he said. "You won't make it," she replied, not unkindly. She requested authorization. Received it. And then she turned the station's corpse into a weapon. Energy surged. Systems screamed. The dead communications dish above them glowed once, brief, incandescent, final. The pulse went out. And came back with silence. Enemy electronics died mid-thought. Their plan collapsed in on itself. Her voice cut through the noise, broadcasting to the surface. Clear, controlled. She warned them. She protected Jax's authority, even as she saved his command. And that choice, quiet, deliberate, changed something in him forever. When the enemy fell, it wasn't because of force. It was because of information. And because someone who had been ignored chose dignity over vengeance. The debrief was quieter than the battle. No alarms, no adrenaline, just truth. Jack spoke carefully, too carefully. He framed, he minimized. He tried to survive with words. The general let him finish. Then asked her to speak. She didn't argue. She showed. Data didn't lie. The room watched authority evaporate. Jack stood stripped of excuses, confronted not by anger but by clarity. "You failed because you didn't listen," the general said. Not to her, not to reality. Relief came swift. Not as punishment. As education. When the room emptied, she remained what she had always been. Quiet. Focused. Unchanged. Weeks later, the station moved differently around her. Respect didn't announce itself, it adjusted. And in the hidden room, beneath the ice, she watched the steady pulse of a recorded heartbeat and remembered why she had never needed a commander's name to answer that question. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the silence after the alarm feel more dangerous than the noise before it? For a brief moment, after the red lights stabilized and the emergency hum settled into a low, mechanical growl, the station felt suspended, like the world was holding its breath. People stood where the chaos had left them, hands half raised, mouths slightly open, waiting for something. Orders, answers, permission to move again. Commander Jax filled that vacuum instinctively. "Lock it down," he barked. "Surface teams, perimeter sweep. Internal security, seal all non-essential sections." His voice was sharp, practiced. It snapped people back into motion. Boots moved. Fingers flew over consoles. The illusion of control returned, thin but comforting. But beneath it, something fundamental was missing. Connection. The screens that should have been alive with satellite feeds and encrypted chatter remained dark. No uplink, no downlink, no distant voice to confirm that someone somewhere still knew they existed. An island. Jax felt it gnawing at him as he moved through the operations center, issuing orders that went only as far as the walls allowed. His authority had always extended upward, into the sky, into command structures that answered back. Now his words fell into a closed loop. Across the room, no one was looking at the woman anymore. She had slipped out during the height of the confusion, not dramatically, not urgently, simply gone like a thought that finishes itself before anyone notices it started. Chief Warrant Officer Elias Vance noticed. He always did. He'd been on this station long enough to know when something didn't belong to the noise. He saw patterns the way engineers do, by noticing what stops repeating. She wasn't where she'd been. And that worried him more than the alarms. Vance had watched her for 6 months, not because she demanded attention but because she avoided it so completely. She moved through the station like a background process, essential, unseen, always running. When systems failed, she appeared. When they stabilized, she vanished again. She never raised her voice, never explained more than necessary, never stayed to receive credit. Men like Jax didn't notice people like that until it was too late. Vance turned back to the console, just as another technician shook his head. "Hardline's dead," the tech said. "Shortwave's fried, even the backup repeaters are slag." Jack slammed his palm against the metal edge of the table. "That's impossible, the shielding." "Protected against EMP," Vance cut in, calm but firm. "Not against this. Particle saturation cooked the microcircuitry. We're isolated." Jax exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. Isolation was a word commanders hated. It meant uncertainty. It meant improvisation without context. It meant vulnerability. "Then we operate blind," Jax said. "We've trained for worse." Vance didn't argue, but his eyes drifted again toward the doorway she'd used. Because she hadn't trained for worse. She had prepared for it. Deep below the station, the door sealed behind her with a soft hiss that felt like relief. Here the noise didn't follow. The room was small, intentionally so. One chair, one console, no decorations, no insignia, no reminders of hierarchy, just clean interfaces and a glow that felt almost organic. She sat. For the first time since the alarm, her hands paused. Not from fear. From memory. Her father had taught her that systems always failed at the edges first, not because the center was stronger, but because the center assumed it would be protected. Real resilience lived in redundancy, in alternatives no one else bothered to imagine. He'd been quiet too. Not timid, not unsure, just uninterested in proving himself to people who didn't understand the language he spoke. She activated the interface. The system responded like it recognized her, not as a user, but as a continuation. Handshake protocol initiated. The encryption key pulsed to life, a waveform shaped not like a code, but like a living thing. A recorded heartbeat, steady and unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what it meant. Her chest tightened. Not grief. That had settled years ago into something heavier, more useful. Purpose. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing as the connection threaded itself across distances that no longer mattered. No satellites, no relays, no fragile infrastructure waiting to be shattered by solar weather or human interference. Just resonance. Connection established. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Above her, Commander Jax was packing. He hated waiting, hated not knowing who was listening. Every report that came in felt incomplete, stripped of context he couldn't replace. Surface team still offline, his second reported. Line-of-sight comms aren't reaching past the structural shielding. Jax clenched his jaw. His men were out there, moving through ice and shadow with only pre-mission assumptions to guide them. No updates, no confirmation, no safety net. This was not how control was supposed to feel. Then the internal comm crackled. "Commander Jax," the voice said. It was calm, flat, unmistakably hers. The operations center went still. Jax turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "Who is this?" "This is Dr. Ares Thorne," she replied. "I have an open channel to Strategic Command." For a heartbeat, Jax thought he'd misheard. "That's not possible," he said. "I suggest you verify," she answered. "The general is waiting." Something flickered behind Jax's eyes. Anger, suspicion, and beneath it, something colder. Fear. He didn't like mysteries he couldn't dominate. "Where are you?" he demanded. "Sublevel storage C7, she said. "I'll open the door." The line went dead. Jax stared at the speaker as if it had betrayed him. Vance didn't hide his reaction. His eyebrows lifted slightly, all cutting through his usual restraint. "She did it," he murmured. "Did what?" Jax snapped. "Build something you don't break," Vance said quietly. The walk to the sublevels felt longer than it was. The red emergency lights cast stretched shadows that clung to the walls like accusations. Jax's boots echoed too loudly. Every step felt like it was taking him further from familiar ground. He prided himself on reading rooms, on understanding dynamics instantly. This room, whatever waited inside it, didn't play by those rules. The door slid open. Blue light spilled into the corridor. Inside, she sat with her back to them, hands moving with measured precision across holographic layers of data. The screen in front of her held the face of a man Jax recognized instantly. General Marcus. Jax snapped to attention without thinking. "Report," the general said, voice steady, eyes sharp. Jax delivered it, concise, controlled, professional. When he finished, the general's gaze shifted, not to him, but to the woman in the chair. "Dr. Marcus said, status." "All hostile long-range interference confirmed," she replied. "We are currently the only operational node in this region." Jax's stomach tightened. That wasn't just a technical statement. It was a transfer of gravity. Before he could respond, another alert flared, different tone, localized. "Perimeter intrusion." Vance leaned forward, eyes scanning the display she pulled up instantly. "That's Sector Gamma," he said, "near the old comm dish." She was already analyzing patterns, seismic anomalies, acoustic signatures, power fluctuations that told a story no camera could. "They're not breaching," she said. "They're planting." "Planting what?" Jax demanded. "Charges," she replied, "on the geothermal cooling lines." The words landed heavy. Vance went pale. "If those go." "We lose power," she finished. "Life support degrades in 12 hours." A countdown appeared. 94 seconds. Jax felt the room tilt. This wasn't a firefight. This wasn't something he could run toward and fix with speed and muscle. This was a problem that required seeing what others missed. And she was already there. "I need authorization," she said, eyes never leaving the data. To interface my system with station defense. The general didn't hesitate. Granted. Jax opened his mouth to protest, protocol risk unknown variables, but stopped himself. For the first time, he understood something uncomfortable. She wasn't stepping into his role. She was operating in a space he had never been trained to see. And right now, she was the only one who could. As energy rerouted and systems screamed under the strain, Jax watched her hands move, steady, deliberate, utterly without panic. She wasn't loud. She wasn't asking for trust. She was simply doing what needed to be done. And somewhere deep inside him, a belief he'd carried his entire career began to fracture. That authority came from rank. That strength announced itself. That silence meant weakness. The countdown kept ticking. And for the first time, Commander Jax realized that the most dangerous person in the room wasn't the one holding a weapon. It was the one who understood the signal beneath the noise. Why did the countdown feel personal, like it was measuring more than time? The numbers glowed in the air between them, descending with indifferent precision. 94, 93, 92. Each second peeled away another layer of certainty Commander Jax had spent a lifetime building. This was the moment where instinct usually took over, where training collapsed into muscle memory and a commander became a blade, fast, decisive, lethal. But there was nothing to charge, nothing to shoot, no enemy he could see with his own eyes. Only a woman seated calmly in a chair, turning the entire station into something he barely understood. Jax's fists clenched at his sides. "Explain," he said, forcing the word out evenly. "Now." She didn't look at him. Not out of defiance, out of necessity. "If I reroute power from the geothermal capacitors," she said, voice steady, "I can overload what's left of the primary communications dish." Vance's head snapped up. "That structure's already compromised. A surge like that will destroy it completely," she finished. "Yes." Jax stared at her. "You're talking about detonating a major installation." "I'm talking about sacrificing debris," she corrected. "It's already dead." The distinction mattered to her. He could hear it. She continued, fingers moving faster now, pulling layers of data into alignment. "The attackers are relying on timed electronic detonators, shielded but not immune. A focused microwave burst at sufficient density will scramble their triggers." Vance swallowed. "That kind of pulse isn't precise." "No," she agreed, "but it doesn't need to be." The countdown hit 70. Jax looked to the general's image on the screen. Marcus's face was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, evaluating, not judging. "What's the risk?" Marcus asked. "The comms building will be unsalvageable," she said. "There's a chance of localized structural collapse. No casualties based on current positioning." "And if you're wrong?" She paused for the first time. "Not long, just enough to acknowledge the truth." "Then the station loses power anyway," she said, "and we die slowly." Silence. Jax felt the weight of that answer settle into his bones. There was no bravado in it, no attempt to soften the outcome, just probability. Marcus nodded once, authorization granted. The words landed like a gavel. Jax exhaled sharply. "You're sure about this?" She turned her head then, looked at him directly. Her eyes were calm, not fearless, focused. "I'm sure this is the only option that leaves room for you to act afterward," she said. The countdown hit 60. Vance didn't wait for orders. He was already moving toward the door. "I'll override the safeties at Junction 7, he said, "but you'll get one shot." "One is all I need," she replied. When the door sealed behind Vance, the room felt smaller. Jack stepped closer to the console, watching the cascading data streams with a mixture of awe and frustration. "How did you know?" he asked. "About the attack, the timing." "I didn't," she said. "I inferred." That fast? She nodded once. They wanted us blind. That only makes sense if the follow-up required precision. The countdown ticked. 50. Outside on the frozen surface, Jax's men moved cautiously through drifting snow, weapons raised, unaware that their lives were being measured by someone they'd never met. They trusted their commander, trusted the silence meant nothing had changed. Jax's jaw tightened. "I need to warn them," he said, "now." She didn't hesitate. "I can route through the emergency vehicle broadcast system," she said. "Low frequency, crude but effective." "Do it." Her fingers moved again, faster now but still controlled. The console hummed differently, deeper, strained. She activated the channel. "This is Dr. Thorne," her voice echoed through the hangar, layered with a faint harmonic distortion. "All surface teams be advised. Hostile forces have placed explosive charges near the geothermal conduits. Detonation imminent." Jax held his breath. "The area around the primary communications dish is now a hostile zone," she continued. "Take cover immediately." She paused, just long enough to matter. "Your commander will issue further instructions shortly." Jax looked at her sharply. She met his gaze for a fraction of a second, then turned back to the console. She had just done something extraordinary. She had handed authority back to him in front of his men, men who would never know how close he'd been to losing everything. The countdown hit 40. Vance's voice crackled through the local channel. "Safeties are bypassed, capacitors are charged, you're green." She acknowledged without looking up. Jax watched her reroute terawatts of energy with the same calm someone might use to adjust a thermostat. Sweat beaded at her temples, the first visible sign that this was costing her something. "Commander," she said quietly, "your men are currently moving into the projected blast radius." Jax's heart lurched. "I need to redirect them." "I've patched their transponders through my system," she said. "You're live." He grabbed the mic. "All teams," he said, voice firm, controlled. "Immediate halt, take cover, move west away from the dish. This is not a drill." Static. Then voices, confused, obedient. They moved. 30 seconds. The room vibrated as energy surged through pathways never designed to carry it. Warning lights flared and died. The station groaned like a living thing under strain. "What happens to you?" Jax asked suddenly. She didn't answer at first. The question wasn't tactical, it was human. "If the feedback arcs incorrectly," she said, "this room will lose power." "And you?" She shrugged slightly. "I'll be very cold." The countdown hit 10. 9. 8. She leaned forward, eyes locked on the final alignment. "This will be loud," she said. 7. 6. Jax braced instinctively, as if for an impact he couldn't see. 5. 4. 3. "Firing," she whispered. She pressed a single icon. The station screamed. On the surface, beneath the shifting curtain of the aurora, the shattered communications dish flared, once, blinding white against the ice. The air itself seemed to ripple as a silent wave of energy tore outward. Then nothing. No explosion. No detonation. Just absence. In the room, the countdown froze. Enemy signatures blinked, then vanished. Jax exhaled, breath shuddering out of him like he'd been holding it for years. "They're disabled," she said, already moving on. "Detonators are fried. They're still armed, still trained, but blind." A new overlay appeared. Red icons, blue icons. Her voice remained calm. "Hostiles are 200 meters east-northeast of your teams, using the coolant housing for cover. They're disoriented. You have the advantage." She turned slightly. "Commander," she said, "they're yours." For a moment, Jax couldn't move. The room felt unreal, like he'd stepped into someone else's war and somehow been handed the outcome. Then the general's voice cut through. "Commander Jax," Marcus said, "you have the field act." Jax straightened. This he understood. He took the mic. "All teams," he said, "move to engage east-northeast, caution and control." He turned toward the door. As he passed her, he slowed, just for a fraction of a second. "Thank you," he said. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. As he disappeared into the corridor, weapons and purpose rushing back into his world, she leaned back in the chair for the first time since the alarm. The room was quieter now. Her hands trembled just slightly. She closed them into fists until they stopped. On the screen, the steady pulse of a recorded heartbeat continued to glow, unbroken. Outside, the gunfire would be brief, efficient, clean. Inside, something more lasting had already changed. Not the station, not the war, but the understanding of what command really meant, and who could hold it without ever asking for permission. What does victory feel like when you never wanted the spotlight? The gunfire on the surface was sharp and brief, carried faintly through layers of ice, steel, and insulation. It came in controlled bursts, disciplined, professional, then faded into silence just as quickly as it had begun. No cheers followed, no celebration, only the quiet confirmation that the threat had been neutralized. Down in the sublevels, the blue-lit room remained still. She sat alone, hands resting lightly on the edge of the console, listening to the station settle back into itself. Systems stabilized, power flows normalized. The frantic edge in the hum beneath her feet softened into something almost peaceful. Her shoulders loosened a fraction. Not relief. Release. She had been holding more than the countdown. On the main screen, the general watched in silence as tactical markers shifted from red to gray. Captured, secured, over. "Well done," Marcus said at last. She inclined her head slightly. The station held. "That's not what I meant," he replied. She didn't answer. Compliments were noise, results were signal. Above them, Commander Jax moved with his team through the aftermath, issuing calm instructions as they secured the captured operatives. He did not raise his voice. He did not posture. Something in him had recalibrated during those 94 seconds. He'd seen what real leverage looked like. And it hadn't been loud. When he returned to the station, snow melting off his gear, the place felt different. Not safer, he'd felt safe before. Smarter, as if the walls themselves had learned something. He paused outside the sublevel corridor. Hesitated. Then continued on. Inside the room, she was already dismantling temporary connections, hands moving with the same care she'd used to build them. The crisis was over. That meant it was time to disappear again. "You could have taken credit," Jax said from the doorway. She didn't turn. It wouldn't have changed the outcome. It would have changed the narrative. She paused, fingers hovering over the console. "Narratives are fragile," she said. "Outcomes endure." Jack stepped fully inside. The blue light caught his face differently, less severe, more human. "I misjudged you," he said. She nodded once, not acceptance, acknowledgement. "That's common," she replied. There was no bitterness in her tone, just fact. He swallowed. "You saved my men." "I preserved a system," she said. "They're part of it." Jax let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "You didn't have to hand authority back to me. Not on that broadcast." Her eyes flicked to him briefly. "Your men needed continuity," she said. "So did you." "And you." "I needed focus." He considered that. For the first time, he wondered what it cost her to always be the invisible solution, to step forward only when everything was already burning. "What happens now?" he asked. She resumed her work, Now we make sure this doesn't happen again. The debrief took place 12 hours later. The station's main conference room was full, but the energy was subdued. No one spoke unless asked. The crisis had stripped away excess confidence, leaving behind something quieter and more careful. General Marcus appeared on the main screen once more, his presence filling the room without effort. Jax gave his report. He kept it precise, tactical, clean, and incomplete. He framed the operation as a coordinated response, a successful interception, civilian technical support that had proven useful under pressure. He did not look at her as he spoke. At the far end of the table she sat with her hands folded, expression unreadable. She did not interrupt, did not correct him, did not seek acknowledgement. She waited. When Jax finished, Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then Dr. Thorne, the general said, "Would you like to add anything?" The room held its breath. She met the general's eyes on the screen. "No," she said. Jax felt a strange flicker of relief, followed immediately by something sharper. Disappointment. Marcus studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "Very well." He turned his gaze back to Jax. "Commander," he said, voice even, "your report is accurate in sequence, not in substance." Jax stiffened. Marcus gestured slightly. The screen behind him split. On one side, security footage played silently, Jax's initial confrontation with her in the common area, the demand, the dismissal, the power play that now looked painfully small. On the other side, a data stream unfolded, time-stamped logs, energy reroutes, communication patches, the 94-second countdown. Her work, every decision, every command, every moment where the station's survival had rested on someone Jax hadn't even tried to understand. The room went still. No one spoke. Jax's ears rang. "This is not about humiliation," Marcus said. "It's about clarity." Jax felt heat crawl up his neck, shame sharp and unmistakable. "You are trained to identify threats," the general continued. "But today your failure was not tactical, it was perceptual." Jax swallowed hard. "You saw a civilian," Marcus said, "a quiet woman without rank or uniform, and you dismissed her. That assumption nearly cost us the station." The words cut deeper than any reprimand Jax had ever received. "Dr. Thorne," Marcus went on, his tone shifting, "is not an auxiliary asset. Project SILUS is now the backbone of our resilient communication strategy. While the rest of the world went dark, she kept us visible." He paused. "Competence," he said, "is command." The sentence settled over the room like gravity. Jax stared at the table. "You are relieved of command effective immediately," Marcus said. "You will be reassigned to a training billet. Your task will be to teach junior officers how to recognize capability, regardless of presentation." It wasn't exile. It was correction. Jax nodded once. "Yes, sir." Marcus turned back to her. "Dr. Thorne," he said, softer now, "you have my thanks and my trust. You will retain authority over this station's communications and defensive integration until further notice." She nodded. That was all. The meeting ended. People filed out quietly, changed in ways they couldn't quite articulate. Jax lingered. When the room was nearly empty, he stopped beside her. "I was wrong," he said. She looked up at him. "I know," she replied. "Not cruel, not smug. Just honest." He hesitated. "I don't think I've ever seen command exercised like that." She considered him for a moment. "Most people only recognize power when it asks to be seen," she said. "Real command doesn't need permission." Jax nodded slowly. As he turned to leave, he understood something he hadn't before. That strength wasn't about taking space. Sometimes It was about holding everything together so quietly that no one realized it had almost fallen apart. And that kind of strength didn't fade when the gunfire stopped. It lingered, like a steady signal beneath the noise. What happens after the noise fades, when no one is watching anymore? The station didn't celebrate. There were no handshakes in the corridors, no raised voices replaying the moment things almost went wrong. People returned to work quietly, as if speaking too loudly might tempt the cold back inside. The Arctic night pressed against the walls like a patient witness, uncaring, constant. For Aries Thorne, that was the real aftermath. Crisis was clean. It had edges, timers, decisions that demanded action and silenced doubt. But aftermath was softer and heavier. It lingered. It asked questions that couldn't be solved with equations. She moved through the station with her tablet tucked under one arm, footsteps measured, mind already 10 steps ahead of what she was repairing. Power routing, sensor redundancy, weak points revealed not by theory but by pressure. The station had shown her its bones. Now she would reinforce them. Engineers began adjusting their schedules around hers without being told. Security teams waited before running diagnostics, just in case she wanted to look first. No memo had been issued, no rank reassigned. Respect had simply settled into place, like snow finding its level. She noticed. She didn't comment. In the engineering bay, Vance watched her work from across the room, pretending to review schematics he already knew by heart. He had spent most of his career believing in gradual fixes, patches, workarounds, things that bought time. She didn't buy time. She erased problems. "You're changing the way the station listens," he said finally, unable to keep the curiosity out of his voice. She didn't look up. "I'm removing assumptions." "About who's speaking," she replied, "and who matters." Vance nodded slowly. That tracked. They worked in silence for a while, the comfortable kind that didn't demand filling. Tools hummed. Data flowed. Somewhere deep below, the geothermal plant breathed steadily, unaware of how close it had come to being silenced forever. After a while, Vance cleared his throat. "You could have stayed topside," he said, "taken the general's offer, command, resources, visibility." She paused. The idea had been presented to her already, quietly, efficiently, with all the incentives that usually accompanied power. A promotion without ceremony. A seat at tables she'd never wanted to sit at. "I don't want visibility," she said. "I want continuity." Vance studied her. "You don't trust them." "I trust systems," she replied. "People are variables. Even the good ones." "Especially the good ones," she said softly. "They change." That was the truth she rarely said out loud. Later, alone in the sublevel room, she reactivated the console, not to connect outward but to review logs. Every second of the incident, every micro-decision. She replayed them not to relive success, but to hunt for error. There was always error. Her father had taught her that perfection wasn't the absence of mistakes. It was the refusal to ignore them. The heartbeat waveform pulsed steadily on the screen. She watched it longer than necessary. He would have liked the station now, she thought. Not the authority, not the recognition. The way the system had adapted under stress. The way it had listened when it mattered. She closed her eyes briefly. For the first time since the alarm, something in her chest ached, not sharply, but persistently. The kind of ache that came from carrying responsibility without release. She had held the line. But holding the line always came with a cost. Commander Jax packed quietly. His reassignment orders were clean, impersonal. No demotion in rank, only in proximity to power. A training billet, a classroom, a chance to turn humiliation into something useful. He deserved worse, some part of him thought. Another part, quieter, newer, knew this was the right punishment. He paused as he sealed his locker, hands resting on the cold metal. He had replayed that first encounter a dozen times in his head. The demand, the assumption, the way he'd tried to define authority by volume. He hadn't just misjudged her. He'd revealed himself. When he found her later, it wasn't planned. She was in a maintenance corridor, kneeling beside an open panel, fingers blackened with grease. No escort, no audience. "Doctor," he said. She looked up. For the first time, there was something different in her eyes. Not warmth, not forgiveness. Recognition. "Yes, Commander." Not former, not relieved. He swallowed. "I wanted to say something before I go." She waited. "I built my career on decisiveness," he said. "On being the one people looked to when things went bad. I thought hesitation was weakness." She tilted her head slightly. "And now?" "Now I think listening might be harder," he admitted. That surprised him, how easily the truth came out. She considered him for a long moment. "Decisiveness without understanding is just speed," she said. "It feels like strength until it fails." He nodded slowly. "I won't make the same mistake again," he said. "That depends," she replied, returning to her work, "on whether you see the next quiet person before they save you." He stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked away lighter than he'd arrived. The station changed in small ways after that. Security drills incorporated redundancy rather than bravado. Engineers were asked questions instead of given orders. Assumptions were challenged, not aggressively, but persistently. And at the center of it all, unseen by most, Ares kept weaving her network. SILUS expanded, not outward but inward. It learned the station's rhythms, its weaknesses, its moods. It became less of a tool and more of a presence. A listening post, not just for signals but for intent. Weeks passed. Then one night, Vance found her in the console room again, standing instead of sitting, arms folded as she stared at the waveform. "You ever think about stopping?" he asked gently. She didn't turn. "Every day." "But you don't." "No." "Why?" She hesitated. "Because this question didn't belong to systems." "My father died because no one heard him in time," she said finally. "Not because they didn't care, because the signal got lost." Vance felt his throat tighten. "I can't fix everything," she continued, "but I can make sure the silence doesn't lie." Vance nodded, understanding settling into him like cold air. Outside, the aurora flared, silent, brilliant, indifferent to human struggle. Light without sound, beauty without explanation. She watched it through reinforced glass later that night, standing alone in the observation corridor. The world would never know her name. And that was fine. Because somewhere out there, when the sky went dark again, and it would, someone would still be listening. And that, she believed, was enough. Why did it feel heavier now, when everything was finally quiet? The station slept, if a place like this could ever truly rest. Systems hummed at their lowest sustainable levels. Lights dimmed automatically in unused corridors. Outside, the ice stretched endlessly beneath a sky stitched with slow-moving stars, ancient and indifferent. Ares Thorne stood alone in the observation corridor. The glass was thick enough to stop a bullet, thick enough to hold back pressure and cold and catastrophe, but it couldn't stop memory. She rested her palm against it anyway, feeling the faint vibration of the station's life beneath her skin. The crisis was over. That was the problem. During the countdown, there had been no room for doubt, no space for reflection. Purpose had filled every corner of her mind, leaving nothing behind. Now, with survival assured and danger catalogued, the silence crept in. And silence always asked for payment. She replayed the final seconds again, not on a screen but in her chest. The moment she'd pressed the icon, the way the station had screamed, the way her hands had trembled afterward, just enough to remind her she was human. She had been calm. But calm was not the same as untouched. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. She didn't turn. She already knew who it was. "You always come here at night," Vance said quietly. She nodded. "It's easier to think when the systems aren't competing for attention." Vance joined her at the glass, hands clasped behind his back. He looked older than he had a week ago. Not weaker, just stripped of illusion. "The general called again," he said. "They want to formalize your authority, rank, structure, protections." She exhaled slowly. "And what did you tell him?" "That you'd need time," Vance replied, "which I think means no." Aries allowed herself the smallest hint of a smile. "It means I don't want the station to confuse obedience with understanding." Vance studied her face. "You don't stay anywhere long, do you?" She considered the question. "I stay where the signal matters," she said. "When it stabilizes, I move on." "That sounds lonely." "It's efficient," she replied. But the word didn't sit right tonight. Vance followed her gaze outward, toward the slow ripple of green light moving across the horizon. "They're already telling the story," he said. "Training centers, command briefings, the quiet doctor who saved the station." She shook her head. "They'll get it wrong." "How?" "They'll make it about the moment," she said. "Not the years before it, not the discipline it took to prepare without recognition, not the cost of being dismissed over and over until dismissal became armor." Vance nodded slowly. "You think that matters?" "I know it does," she said, "because the next person like me will be sitting alone at a table somewhere, and someone louder will ask a question meant to shrink them." She turned from the glass at last, meeting his eyes. "What happens then depends on what story survives." Vance didn't answer. He didn't need to. The next morning, the station resumed full operational rhythm. Cargo schedules updated, rotations adjusted, a new security doctrine quietly distributed, one that emphasized cross-discipline authority and redundant decision-making. No one said her name during the briefing. Everyone felt her influence. Engineers questioned assumptions they would have accepted a week earlier. Junior officers paused before speaking, measuring certainty against evidence. Even the air felt different, less brittle, more deliberate. Aries spent the day finalizing transfers. Not of people, of knowledge. She embedded SILUS deeper into the station's architecture, then carefully stepped herself out of the loop. Redundancy upon redundancy. If she disappeared tomorrow, the system would still listen. That was the goal. Late in the afternoon, a message arrived on her console, not encrypted, not classified. A simple text request. "Commander Jax." She hesitated before responding. They met in the common area where it had all begun. Same steel tables, same recycled air, different gravity. Jax looked steadier, less sharp at the edges, like someone who had finally stopped trying to outrun his own reflection. "I leave tonight," he said. She nodded. "Safe travels." He paused. "I wanted to thank you, not for saving my command, for ending it." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "I needed to be wrong," he continued. "Publicly, completely. Otherwise I'd never have learned what kind of leader I actually was." She studied him, searching for defensiveness. Found none. "Most people don't survive that lesson," she said. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "But I'll teach it now, over and over, to people who think leadership sounds like shouting." She stood, then something good came of it. He hesitated. "May I ask you something?" She nodded. "When I asked who your commander was," he said, voice low, "what did you mean?" She considered the question. "My commander," she said slowly, "is the responsibility itself, the problem that has no one else willing or able to answer it." Jax exhaled, the words settling into him like a long-delayed truth. He extended his hand. After a brief pause, she took it. The contact was brief, professional, final. That night Aries packed. Not much. She never owned much. A tablet, a change of clothes, a small data crystal containing a waveform no one else could decode. Before leaving, she returned to the sublevel room one last time. The console glowed softly, steady and autonomous now. The heartbeat pulsed on-screen, calm and unbroken. She reached out and rested her fingers lightly against the projection. "We're still listening," she whispered. There was no reply. There didn't need to be. As she walked toward the departure bay, the station carried on without her, stronger, quieter, more aware than it had been before. It didn't need her presence anymore. That was how she knew she had succeeded. Outside, the cold wrapped around her like truth, unforgiving, honest, clean. She boarded the transport without ceremony. No one saluted. No one announced her departure. The station receded into the white as the craft lifted, a small, stubborn mark against the endless Arctic. Somewhere, someday, another system would fail. Another room would go silent. Another voice would demand authority instead of understanding. And maybe, because of what happened here, someone would pause before answering. Because sometimes, the strongest command is not the one that shouts. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.